everybody. Welcome to our most recent edition, our March edition of Compass. So I think Brian said we still have some people coming in to join us. So I will start with the land acknowledgement, our traditional land acknowledgement, to acknowledge the land upon which we all sit, which many of us sit in on traditional territory. But at Ryerson, we sit on traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the Mississaugas and the Haudenosaunee. And so I'm going to read Ryerson's land acknowledgement at this time. So Toronto is the dish with one spoon territory. The dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunees that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. So today we are welcoming Michael Lück from Auckland University of Technology. And I just wanted to talk a bit about Compass and what this is all about. So prior to COVID, we had a speaker series and it was in person, as most of them were. And then once COVID happened, we decided to pivot. And so it's actually been a really good platform for us to bring in speakers from all around the world related to, mostly the theme has been sustainability and tourism. And today is no different because Mika also works in sustainability and tourism within usually the marine environment. And so Compass is brought to you by our research institute here at Ryerson, so the Institute for Hospitality and Tourism Research. And the institute was established in 2009 to be the research school of the Ted Rogers School of Hospitality and Tourism Management, with the mission to facilitate and conduct research of scholarly value and significance to the tourism and hospitality field, and to mobilize knowledge through traditional and non-traditional channels to reach academic, student, and professional audiences. Our affiliates conduct research on a number of topics, including destination management, sustainability, Indigenous tourism, and visiting friends and relatives. You can visit our website at HTMResearch.ca for more information about past and current research projects. Some other fun things we did this year was a podcast. Brian, who is our communications person, has started a podcast called Behind the Study, and it's really fun listen. Really talking about, you know, as researchers, why we conduct our research and how we conduct our research, and what are the stories behind, you know, how we got into doing what we're doing. We just had season 2 come out. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website. So now I want to introduce you to the lovely Mika. So Mika is a professor at the School of Hospitality and Tourism at Auckland University of Technology. And that's in New Zealand, where they are free right now and having giant festivals and parties and barbecues. Whereas many of us, wherever you are not doing that right now. So it's really hard sometimes to see Mika's Facebook because, you know, he posts like going out to see a live music or restaurant or travel. And it kind of kills me just a little bit each and every time. But it's good. It's good. It gives me hope. So he is also the founding co-chair of the International Coastal and Marine Tourism Society. Mika has more than 10 years in work experience in the tourism industry, and his research interests include wildlife tourism, the cruise industry. Yes, you do love that cruise industry. Mika speaks far and wide about the cruise industry and his thoughts on it. The impacts of tourism and aviation. He's published in a number of international journals, is the founding editor of the academic journal Tourism in Marine Environments. He's the associate editor of the Journal of Ecotourism and editorial board of Main Policy and Frontiers. He does lots of fun work on the marine environment, which is one of my favorite topics. So I'm excited to hear about what you're talking with us, or what you're talking about today. So thank you, Mika, and I will pass it on to you.
Thank you, Sonia, for the very kind introduction. Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everybody to this presentation, and thank you for the invitation. I feel actually really honored doing that and being one of the speakers in your series there. And as Sonia just said, we are COVID-free basically. We have the occasional lockdown for maybe a week, maximum 2 weeks, and then we are back to normal. At the moment, we are hosting the America's Cup, so don't know if it reaches the Canadian shores, but people with an interest in sailing certainly hear about it. And we have literally every day thousands of spectators here in the viaduct. So we are pretty lucky here in New Zealand. The other thing that Sonia just mentioned is that I do some fun work, and actually there's a lot of truth to it. So the picture that you hopefully can see here on the slide is actually one that I did during or took during one of my research trips. So what can be better than being out on the boat every day and looking at dolphins, whales, at birds and so on, and enjoy the environment. It's just absolutely fantastic. So Brian and Sonia asked me to talk about a little bit about some sustainable issues or sustainability issues. And I had a look and a thought about what I would like you or what I would like to talk to you about. And I deliberately went a little bit away from the, oh, okay, screen sharing has stopped, I just see. I share again. Shall I share again? Shall I try again?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes, you're all good.
Fantastic. Okay, where was I? Oh, and the vast majority of marine wildlife tourism or wildlife tourism literature, when you talk about sustainability, is actually particularly looking at the impacts, and that's natural. What impacts do we have? And because it's been quite prolific, that work in that field, both by marine biologists and by tourism researchers, I decided, and don't be disappointed, not to talk about that. So I will look at a little bit of a different perspective. So, and now there we go. So for today, I just a couple of sentences about me. I don't want to dwell on that one. Some very basics about sustainability, some mostly what you know anyway. So it's just like an intro in there. And then we talk about 3 different types of creatures, whales and dolphins, about pelagic birds. And then you probably are most intrigued about merfolk. Something you might not have heard about, but if you have, you will be probably quite surprised what we are talking about or what I'm talking about. So let's go into it. I said a little bit about myself. I don't bore you with a long history of what I've been doing in my life or so, but the one thing that shaped me was basically my dad, who encouraged me. That was one of the few things we were allowed to watch on a Sunday morning, were actually documentaries on wildlife, particular Jacques Cousteau's documentaries about marine wildlife. I suppose pretty much everybody has heard about Jacques Cousteau. He is the one who also co-invented the scuba diving gear that allows us to go into the depths of the sea in a very different way, and even on a recreational basis as well. But we also had a couple in Germany showing a lot of stuff. They're actually Austrians, Lotte and Hans Haas. And they did kind of documentaries, but also understood that, at least at that time, if you wanted to bring a message across about nature or so, you have to put some thrill in it. You have to make it quite exciting. And so they put like kind of movies together with some excitement. Today, from an educational perspective, you probably would not approve it, because it's including things like you see on the poster, showing a shark as a big predator and the man-eater. And in today's world, we try to do exactly the opposite. But to their credit, they've done an awful lot of good documentaries, lots of research and so on. So they were trailblazers as well, alongside Jacques Cousteau. So that formed and shaped my interest, but also while I was living in the center of Germany, pretty landlocked, our grandparents lived at the coast, and every holidays we went there, and I felt more at home at the coast anytime that I was visiting than the main times I was living landlocked. So that shaped me a little bit, but I was actually not good enough with math and science and all that stuff to become a marine biologist. So I did the second best thing, I think, and that was tourism. And I worked in the industry, like Sonia said, for a while, and then went into academia, did my PhD here in New Zealand, went to Scotland at Napier University for a year, and then close to you guys in St. Catherine's and at Brock University. And now I've been back here in New Zealand for 15, 16 years roughly, and looks like I'm going to stay here. So that's just a very brief background. But if you look at it, this picture is well known in various shapes and forms. You see Africa there with Madagascar here, but the main thing is to reiterate that our planet is 3/4, 2/3 water, so ocean. And we always hear we know less about the bottom of the sea than we know about the surface of the moon, for example, and that's simply because it's incredibly difficult to access. Then talking about sustainability going into that, I think this is a quote from Herman Daly, which I think is very, very telling. And that's exactly what we probably do a lot in the world at the moment, especially in some parts of the world. I'm not going into any political debate or so, but some governments or so basically wrote us off and say it's all, it doesn't matter. Either we are too far or it's non-existent. Anything around climate change, anything about environmental issues or so, and we can't do that. We just cannot live in that way, and we cannot go the way we have been going for many, many years. So we have, in terms of environment, in terms of sustainability, very, very well-known advocates. And you will recognize at least a couple of those people here on the top left, the great David Attenborough, doing documentaries of the highest quality and reaches an audience that normally would probably not have a great interest in the environment. So this is a massive tool to spread education and spread the message. On the top right, Jane Goodall, well known for her work as the chimpanzee lady. So she from early on was a researcher, looked at apes. And is now traveling around the world. She is quite old now, and it's still endlessly traveling. We had her here in Auckland a couple of years ago. I think we had the honor to see her. And she said over the last 30 years, she's never been longer in one place, including her home, more than 3 weeks. So she's constantly on the road to spread the message and try to convince people to change a little bit. On the bottom left is probably somebody you don't know very well, Claudia Earl, Sylvia Earl. She is actually one of the first female marine scientists who really made a splash. So she really is a trailblazer in marine science and has worked with National Geographic and so on. So again, was instrumental in bringing the environment at the forefront. And then the bottom right, you may or hopefully recognize because he is Canadian. He looks very Japanese, and that's because his heritage is Japanese, but he is a Canadian. That's David Suzuki, and I'm sure you have heard of David. And he again is one of those advocates around the world who's working very, very hard to make the world a better place. But you might have also seen the inconvenient truth. Al Gore was a politician, was the former vice president of the US. So he used his fame or his dominance as a person and being well known and talked about it. And that made a big splash as well. So people became in the mainstream very, very aware of those issues. And then probably on the right, you have seen the inconvenient sequel. It didn't become as well known or so, but both are very well worth having a look. So have a look at YouTube or wherever, Netflix or so, wherever you might be able to find it, and have a watch, especially the first one. But then we also have this. And, you know, everybody laughed about it a while ago, but so that was 2012 when he became president. Unfortunately, it became very clear that it's not a laughing matter, but it changed very quickly. And he pretty much dismantled whatever he could to dismantle in terms of environmental things, including their own parks agencies and so on and so forth. So we have that as well, and unfortunately many followers as well who believe things what he and similar people say. So this is basically where we're looking at from a global perspective, and from a perspective where people are thinking about sustainability or climate change in one way or the other. So you're usually on one side or the other. Either you believe it's true and we have to do something, or you all brush it off and say, oh, it doesn't bother me, or I'm dead by then, or it's actually even a fake or a hoax. But that's a global picture. But then we also have in tourism specific some sustainability issue. And if you look at this photo there, that is actually in Milford Sound here in New Zealand, one of the top destinations or top hotspots in New Zealand. And this is a picture you get on the internet and advertising material and so on. And then when you travel down there, not this year or last year, but before, then you encounter this. Very common picture. Similar here, the Tongariro Alpine crossing, one of our famous walks in the center of the North Island, became incredibly popular and famous after the Lord of the Rings filming, because that's Mordor. So that was filmed up on Mount Nauruhoi and Tongariro. And that was, again, was a beautiful hike, a one-day hike. You go one way, and then on the other side, a shuttle bus would pick you up and drive you back. Quite challenging, but a good or easily achievable within one day. And now if you look at it, it looks like that. Again, pre-COVID, obviously, but even now during COVID, domestic tourists go there as well quite a bit. So we have now on a good day, 2,500 to 3,000 visitors on that trek. And a good day is obviously a bad day in terms of the environment and in terms also of the visitor experience. So we can't work like that in a sustainable manner. Then I show you a very quick clip. I hope the sound comes through as well. Let's see.
Ever since we first went to sea, we've set about finding new, if not necessarily better ways of imposing ourselves on the water. Along the way, there have been some necessary adjustments in size as our numbers have grown and grown and grown. She is the largest passenger ship ever to sail. Taller than a 20-story building, 3 times as big as the Titanic, 10 times as garish. The Grand Princess is the queen of the world's new superliners. She's steaming out of a much-relieved Venice for 7 days cruising in the Mediterranean.
So that's a Grand Princess, and that video clip is actually from 1999. So fast forward 20 years, and you look at the biggest ship now that's more than double the size. And Sonia mentioned that I've got a pretty strong view. That was really kind, Sonia, because my strong view is actually, yeah, very antagonistic and totally against the cruise industry in many ways, simply because they are not sustainable in any shape or form. If you look at the triple bottom line, they're not sustainable environmentally, they're not sustainable socially and culturally, and even financially, they're not sustainable except for their own pockets, but not for the communities they visit. So all those things make a big difference, but the United Nations helped us with some goals that we should actually reach. And you all have heard about the 17 SDGs, the Sustainability Development Goals. And nobody expects every operation, every region, every country or so to reach all those 17. Sometimes it's just not possible. For example, if you have a landlocked country like Switzerland, you don't have life below water apart from rivers and lakes or so, but no seacoast. So number 14 would not apply to them. So it's just an overview of the things we should look at and work towards. And tourism is no exception there. Going back to sustainability and sustainable tourism, an early adoption of that in 1995 by Hunter is a definition that I really still like doing because it's straightforward. And again, you all probably know about the definitions of sustainability or sustainable tourism, so I won't go and read them all to you. But those are basically the things. So meet the needs and wants of the local host community, the tourism industry, the tourists themselves, but at the same time safeguard the environmental resources, including natural, cultural components and so on, so that we perpetuate the safety and health of those resources. Also, the United Nations World Tourism Organization is looking very, very closely at that in terms of their certification of tourism programs at schools, at universities. We got certified in 2019 at our School of Hospitality and Tourism here for our Bachelor of International Tourism Management. And what we saw during the whole certification process is that they put an enormous emphasis at the moment on ethics and equity. So the environmental part is still very important, but they really look very, very carefully now on all those things in terms of ethics, equity, and cultural issues and so on. And that's from both perspectives. So they very clearly looked either what we both at what we are teaching in terms of that, but also how we treat our students. So we've got a very, like you in Canada, a very multicultural population, and how do we make sure everybody gets a fair access to education, fair access to learning material, to instructors, and so on and so forth. So a lot of that is happening, which is really the good news. So far for the intro. I'm going a bit faster now through the initial one, but based my whole work in tourism and research is basically based on my PhD 20 years ago, roughly. Please note the disclaimer there, it's an absolute stereotype. So my idea was basically looking at environmentalism, and environmentalism, I developed a score basically based on environmental behavior, on environmental attitudes and values, and combined that, and then looked at the experience on Swim with Dolphin Tours. And the idea was initially, again, remember it's 20 years back, that those people from countries that are traditionally more environmentally friendly, so Germany has been always at the forefront, that they probably have a lower experience because they're thinking twice about what they're doing, or they're going out on a tour and say, well, it was fantastic, but maybe we should think about, is swimming with dolphins necessary, or can we just watch dolphins, or things like that. Whereas in contrast, those traditionally and stereotypically maybe with less environmental values, that those people had a great experience because they just enjoyed what they did and didn't think further. So I tried to do that and put that in a survey, and then I came up with the actual results. And you see that I all landed actually in one quadrant, so not across as I expected. But if you dissect that a little bit further, and I think, yeah, here's my pointer. So if you see Germany, for example, is here in the top left corner, and even within this, it's still in the top left corner. So quite a bit of stuff got confirmed, but really not to a large extent. And I did similar modeling with other demographics in terms of age and gender and education levels and things like that. And it's pretty much exactly the same, always ends up there. So on those tours, people were relatively environmentally friendly and had a great experience as well. But what came out, and whenever I do a quantitative survey, I always put qualitative components in there, and especially on at the last page, I keep a whole page and say, tell me whatever you want to do about your tour, about your visit, about dolphins, about whatever you like. And I got a lot of those comments that you can see here. More information on, would have liked to learn, would like to hear more about. So that ended up basically in saying, oh, tourists actually want to be educated, even though Bob McKercher said tourists are nothing but consumers and not interested in education when on holidays. And I'm going to show you another clip now and have a look here.
It's no wonder this is heaven for the amateur adventurer, wanting to see the wild continent in comfort.
See, like I don't do camping and I don't do hiking and I'm not a climber.
It's around $30,000 for a berth on this Russian icebreaker. What that money buys, past explorers could never have even imagined.
We're on the biggest iceberg, B15, the biggest iceberg in the world.
An iceberg the size of Canterbury, the perfect place to drink champagne.
Thank you.
They won't believe it in New York.
So I don't know if it came through, it faded out a little bit where they don't believe it in New York. So I would argue that person literally is one of Bob McKercher's stereotypes there. So I don't think she has much of an interest in Antarctica or in learning anything about it. It's about bragging rights, right? So I've been there. You won't believe in New York that I went there and what I saw and things like that. So there is certainly some truth to it. But what I found in my study, as I just said, is that tourists really want to be educated and they actually want to learn on tours. They actually expect it on tours. And if you look at the term educated, that is probably sometimes a sticking point. We are looking at informal education, not classroom education. And then it makes it much nicer. I went, for example, on a whale watch tour with the Pacific Whale Foundation in Hawaii, which is the largest non-for-profit whale watching organization. Trailblazers in terms of education and interpretation on whale watching tours, absolutely fantastic. So I was looking forward, it was my first visit with them. And then after a while of intro and so on, then the guide came on and said, and now we are educating you. And I thought, oh my God, that's what people don't want. They want to be educated about it. They don't want that term because immediately it implies it's formal, it's something to impose on you or so. So I would never term it that way, but they do, again, a fantastic job there. It was just this one blip of the guide there. But then when we look at the content and how education and interpretation is done for tourists, there are some real issues there. So if you look at Marsberg and Savage, they say interpretation is not designed based on the desires of the tourists, but reflect the need of staff. So we're not looking what tourists want to learn, but basically what we want to tell them. And there can be a massive disconnect. And in fact, MacArthur and Hall say interpretation objectives are actually in the opposite order of importance to how they're desired by tourists. So managers' objectives first, and then tourist objectives last, basically. And if you work that way, then you sometimes, or very likely, have less success with your interpretation because people are not interested in what you tell them. Now, Paul Forrestal and Greg Kaufman developed a model, the first one on whale watching and interpretation, and Mark Orams developed it further, the model you see here. And I was particularly interested in two parts of it. And it's this one, the effective domain. So the effective domain, and Mark proposes that anything you talk to people about, you should actually talk about things that are touching people's hearts. So they relate more to things about birth and death and babies and all those things that you naturally have a more affection towards. And then if you do that, that information sticks much better. And then the other one I'm interested in is the opportunity to act. So often in those models says you need to give them an incentive to act afterwards, to become better citizens later on, but you also want them to have an opportunity to do that. Otherwise they just walk away and then they go back home and nothing changes really. So that's where our first case comes in, whale watching and dolphin watching and swimming here in New Zealand. So the first study site, my colleague Brooke Porter and I, we worked a lot together on all three projects that I'm showing you today. So that's Auckland, our city here. And here you can see, hold on, I just have to go back with my cursor. So here's Auckland, and Sonia just asked me where I'm living. I am just living right here, so I can see out here to the sea. So in Auckland, the tours start right in the city center, go out here past Rangitoto Island and out in the Hauraki Gulf here, and the top here goes out to the open sea. So that's a peninsula, the Coromandel Peninsula. And it's a huge, vast area, and we go out on about 4.5 hour trips. So it can be quite lengthy at times, especially if it's hard to find wildlife. This is what I fancily call a research platform, which basically is a boat. It's a whale watch boat here, again, right in the city of Auckland. And we go on those tours and then survey people. Those are the critters we are usually looking for. Common dolphins. We have 4 different species of dolphins in New Zealand. The common dolphins are the ones here in Auckland that can be seen. They're pelagic dolphins, so they're open water dolphins, not so much coastal dolphins. And again, that makes them much more difficult to find. And we've got Brodus whales, so not the largest whales, but still whales. Some of them are resident here in the Hauraki Gulf and some are transient, so they're coming in and out as well. And then in New Zealand, you occasionally see a whole raft of other marine mammals, from even up to blue whales. Orca come through relatively frequently, and all kinds of whales. Humpback whales increased a little bit again, some beaked whales, and so on and so forth. And the other thing that is very interesting on those tours are those birds that are called Australasian gannets. And they are basically like torpedoes going into the water and fishing. And they're our helpers in terms of finding whales and dolphins, because they're feeding on the same fish. And dolphins and whales, even whales are large animals. They're very hard to spot on the water. And it's much easier to spot those birds diving. If you have a whole flock there diving, there's a good likelihood then that you have dolphins and or whales there as well, because they're feeding on the same fish. Second study site is Kaikoura on the South Island. This is the township of Kaikoura, and I'm actually a bit annoyed that the cursor also always disappeared. So this is the township of Kaikoura, and the tours start from here in South Bay. There's a jetty here, and it goes out to the south. So you're being bussed over. It's an 8-minute bus ride, and then go out. And I show you now in a moment why that is, why we're not leaving here from Kaikoura itself. So for those of you who are not very familiar with New Zealand, the both main islands and Stewart Island here at the bottom, Auckland is here, so that's where we are living. Our capital is Wellington, and Kaikoura is here halfway roughly between Christchurch, which is the largest city on the South Island, and Picton, which is a ferry port over to the North Island. So halfway over is Kaikoura. What makes Kaikoura so special is what you can see in this map, and you can see with the different colors here the relief of the seafloor, and you can see deeper waters here coming very close to shore. And if you look at it from this perspective, you see here we have this deep sea canyon, the Kaikoura Canyon here. We've got, in addition, 2 ocean currents converging, and that creates lots of upwelling and incredibly nutrient-rich waters. And that means there's lots and lots of food there, and that attracts lots and lots of wildlife, from sea birds to seals and sea lions, dolphins, whales, and so on and so forth. And again, that is the reason why we're leaving here from the south side of the peninsula, because we're traveling out here, and we have the famous sperm whales here. And because sperm whales are the deepest diving whales, you usually can't see them close enough to shore. The Azores is one example where you can do it as well in the middle of the Atlantic, but usually they're too far away for viable whale watching tours. And because of the canyon, we have them relatively close to shore. So again, in a 4-hour tour, you can see some whales there. But I'm particularly interested in the dolphin tours. We have swim with dolphin tours, so you can swim in open waters with free-ranging dusky dolphins there. And you can see here, that's the research platform we use there. Here's one of the Duskies, here's another one. And the Duskies are actually the most acrobatic dolphins. They're relatively small, but they're jumping and leaping and breaching all the time. So it's like really fun to watch, but it's also great to swim with them because they come in often in pods up to 1,000 dolphins at any one time. So really great experience. So what we did there is then, again, Brooke and myself, we did an IP analysis, which is a very straightforward basic analysis. So in terms of looking how it works, we asked certain items, we asked people, how important is that to you? And then also, how well did the operator do with that item? And then you plot that in that graph, and then you get those 4 quadrants. And the first one here is where we have very high importance to people. They say, yep, that, let's say, a safe boat is very important to us. And then they say, okay, the operator did very well. They actually provided us with a comfortable and safe boat. And then it would plot in here somewhere. Then the next one is concentrate here. So it's high importance as well to customers, but the operator doesn't do as well. Then the next one is low priority, so it is not very important, and it's not on the radar really of the operator that much either, so it doesn't really matter too much. And the next one is where it's not really important to customers, but the operator does very well, and therefore is possibly overkilling it, spending too many resources, too much money on that one. So our items in terms of education fit in here, and we're going through them in a moment very quickly to show you where the items fit. So first one, keep up the good work. So you can see knowledgeable guides and information and so on. And I highlighted this one, opportunity to learn about dolphins. So keep that one in mind, opportunity to learn about dolphins. So the operator did a good job there. Next one, concentrate here. So those are the ones that are important, but probably not so much done by the operators. So learning about the threats of the dolphins and learning what I can do to protect the marine environment. And that's exactly what came out of the first study during my PhD. And it still hasn't changed really, that one. Then low priority. That is was a bit of a surprise because those came out in my first study. So I added those items, but now they're scored pretty lowly. So it's not as important to people as it was 20 years ago. So again, don't worry about looking at every single one of them. I only want to show you some of the clusters here. The first one is, those are the top scoring ones. So totally agree or agree. So the vast majority of people totally agreed or agreed. They're all around staff, tour staff, skippers, guides, knowledgeable, safety instructions, and so on. So those were the top scores there. But then the lowest scores, where I have learned a lot about dolphins and I've learned a lot about the marine wildlife in general. And if you go back to the one I said, remember this one, opportunity to learn. So the operator did very well according to the respondents, gave me lots of opportunities to learn, but I didn't actually learn as much. So that's a bit of a disconnect there that we haven't figured out why that came about. So that's quite interesting to see. But again, open-ended opportunities I would have liked to learn more about. And then again, anything else you want to tell us. And here is a thematic analysis that we did then afterwards. No surprise, wildlife and whales and dolphins as the main themes. But then you can have sub-themes here, threats to whales and dolphins, lots of things about breeding, number of young dolphins, social behavior, and things like that. So those were very, very dominant in that open-ended part. And just a couple of quotes here. This person said, would have liked to learn more info about dolphins, breeding, lifespan, wild-caught dusky dolphins, how far they travel, and so on and so forth. Next one said, more information about international whale protection progress, would like to see more education for Asians, Japanese, highlighting problems for whales on their way to Antarctic and what awaits them, whaling ships, how they can help change the fate of these creatures they have taken the time to admire on this trip. And then another one, Skipper told us how we are and have damaged the ocean and put toxins in there and so on, but he didn't tell us what we could do to repair. And the last one there as well didn't tell us what we can do to help. And then if you look back at Mark Orum's model and what we did on our tours, you can see the effective domain, absolutely. So again, very much those things that are close to your heart, threats, climate change, how many babies breeding and so on. So it's totally confirmed there. That's what people want to learn about. And they want an opportunity to act. So not just a motivation or incentive, but they really want an opportunity to act and want to say, what can we do? What can we do to help? You didn't tell us that. You said we are bad with the environment, but what can we do to make it better? So basically that was the first paper that I published out of it, saying, yes, tourists want to be educated, but nobody looked at actually what they wanted to learn. And that was then the follow-up paper out of that. Moving on to our next example, pelagic bird watching. Pelagic means basically ocean, open water birds. So it's not like your sparrows or blackbirds or something like that, but it's seabirds. And you can see here one of the albatross here in New Zealand. So without going into depth there, that's pretty old data. It's hard to always get up-to-date stuff. But the only thing I want to show you or illustrate with that is that it has grown massively. Bird watching, both terrestrial and pelagic, have morphed from a very small niche, nerdy activity to now a mainstream activity in leisure, recreation, and in tourism. So even between 2005 and 2009, so a long time ago, 20 million already have done it just in America. So if you look at the demographics where those people come from, even here in New Zealand as well, the vast majority are Americans or Brits. So they seem to be particularly keen on bird watching. And then I'm not sure if you've seen that one. If not, please have a look. Look it up and watch that movie. One of the best movies I've ever seen. Taking totally the mickey out of bird watching, but put bird watching also on the map. And the Big Year is basically based on the Big Year competition. It's an American bird watching competition where really serious birders travel around the country all year and tick off a list. And the one who can, at the end of the year, demonstrate that they have seen the vast majority or the most different species, then they win the Big Year. And they go to pretty extremes to see specific birds within the US, travel around to the very remote areas of Alaska and so on, just to find a specific species. So it's a really good movie to watch, I think. But you don't even have to go to the US or do the Big Year. In New Zealand, we have a bird watching Facebook page, and somebody said here, posted on that page, my big day, a total of 45 species, all within 5 kilometers of my home here in Auckland. So people do that at home. They do it in small numbers, they do it in big numbers, they do it in small time frames, just a weekend or a day, sometimes a whole holiday. So it's a very, very popular activity now. So again, our case study sites for that study, Kaikoura, you know Kaikoura by now, and the second one, Stewart Island. Remember, at the very bottom of New Zealand, that island. So those are the guys you can see here, Kaikoura in particular, but New Zealand in general, South Island, very famous for albatross, the great birds, the great albatross, up to 3 meters wingspan, the Northern Royal albatross. Absolutely majestic birds. It's fantastic watching them, seeing them. It's a sheer beauty, and even almost anybody who is not a bird watcher or a birder will get drawn in by birds like that. This is, for example, on Stewart Island here, right from the boat, and you can see those birds. So we wanted to tag on education there initially as well, but then realized on pelagic bird watching, nothing much has been done. And so we looked at particular first, who are they actually? So we asked them in a quantitative survey, Do they come to New Zealand specifically to watch birds? What kind of equipment they have? We had a whole list of them. What kind of clothing do they have? How long have they been bird watching, and so on? And we came up with those 5 groups here. The first are the veterans, and I highlighted a few things, don't go into detail there. But they have been usually bird watching for a very long time, and they see themselves as experts. 100% said, yeah, I'm an expert bird watcher. They keep a log, so not only for their trip, but a lifelong log, what species, where, and they've seen them when, what time, and so on. And they're looking particularly for rare birds. And that's great in New Zealand because we have very many endemic birds, so they can't see them anywhere else, so they have to come to New Zealand to see them. The second one, they are the ones that are most likely to come to New Zealand. 100% that came specifically to New Zealand, and 35% specifically to Kaikoura for bird watching. And they're collecting. Again, they're ticking off the checklist and say, I've seen this, and so on. And they're keeping logs as well, usually. Then we've got the new enthusiasts. So they are relatively new to it, probably about 10 years maximum. And they're mostly interested in photography. So that might be a generation thing. So those people are more into photography rather than other things, but they're also keeping a log and want to see rare species or tick boxes as well. But they're not necessarily come to New Zealand specifically for that, or even to Kaikoura. And then the first timers, literally as the name says, they are the least prepared. They have no checklist and so on. That's, for many of them, is literally just the first trip. We had, I remember, a young couple, maybe in their early 20s on their trip, and they just said, oh, we were swimming with dolphins yesterday, and we saw in the shop that little flyer there for bird watching, and we thought albatross could be interesting, so we booked that. So they're not particularly interested in bird watching. And then the last one is the hobbyists. They're very similar to the first group. The only difference really there, the main difference, is that they don't see themselves as experts, whereas the first ones, the serious ones, they said we are experts, 100% of them. Those guys here don't, but everything else is relatively similar there. But the main issue about that, which came through without even asking. So that was an unexpected finding, and that is based on interviews and the quantitative survey. And we compared that with Jackie Ziegler's and Phil Dearden and a team. They called it the guilty pleasure around feeding wildlife, and we call it the ethical dilemma. And if you look at Phil Dearden and Jackie Ziegler and so on, they looked at ocelot in the Philippines at the whale shark swimming. And you can see those photos here. Just Google it, and the internet is full of photos that are totally inappropriate from our perspective in terms of how you conduct wildlife viewing and wildlife tours. You can see in the top there people hanging on the outriggers of those boats, and the massively large whale shark right next to it. People try to ride them, touch them, grab onto their fins and so on. Why Jackie and Phil and so on called it the guilty pleasure is actually they found that a large number of those people knew before they undertook that activity that it was bad. They knew what was going on, but they still did it. Yeah, and we had actually a similar experience. So this is in Kaikoura. What they do there, they hang out a bait ball at the end of the boat. That's just a block of frozen fish guts and pieces and so on, and that attracts those birds, and you can see that here. So there's sometimes huge flocks of birds, sometimes a few, but you can see how close they are to the boat. Absolutely fantastic to take photos of them. You don't need a zoom lens or being particularly great photographer, and can still do fantastic photos. And then on Stewart Island, the skipper, similar, has just a few pieces of fish, and then occasionally feeds the birds like that. So what our respondents then said, again, we didn't even ask in the interviews, that was totally unprompted. A whole bunch of interviewees actually talked about it. And again, no reason to read all of that. But basically what they said, I wasn't sure about it. I knew it beforehand, but I wasn't sure if I should do it or so. But it provided me with a great experience. So I did it, and I absolutely loved it. And the real interesting part, both in Jackie's study and our study, is, and I would like to have a psychologist looking at things like that, people tend to negotiate this conflict, this ethical dilemma, knowing what they're doing is wrong, but still doing it. And it's called acrasia. There's actually a term for it. But it's really interesting that they're not only doing it and saying, yes, we did it, or yes, you know, birds are being fed there or so. They always put then an afterthought why it's actually not that bad after all. In Jackie's case, they said, oh, it's better than in the zoo, or one commented, saying, oh, if I don't know, if I don't experience this myself, I can't judge it. How can I judge something, you know, if I just see on the internet that it's bad? So always basically justifying what you're doing. And our respondents here said as well, at the bottom, for example, they're saying, yes, it gave me a good experience. Some said, oh, they're following fishing boats. They use the boats anyway and being fed by that. So that is just really a very interesting part of it. And so we both concluded basically that we need more research in that. We don't know for sure in many cases if provisioning, if feeding wildlife is actually bad or not. It's very much location dependent, it's species dependent, it's how they're fed, what they're fed, and so on. So it's a whole bunch of work needs to do there. But as long as we don't have any evidence there, scientific evidence, we don't think that it's an ethical practice and it's not sustainable. And lastly, and that's probably the one you were waiting for, that is actually Brock in the purple shirt there and the purple top, my collaborator. This is in the Philippines in Boracay, and that's a mermaid. And you might be surprised what that to do with tourism, what's that to do with sustainability, and are they not all lunatics? And I'm going to show you a little bit more about this now. Mermaids have been mythical creatures for a very long time, and you can see historic things, and maybe one of the more surprising parts for you is it's also men, and that's why we refer to them mostly as merfolk, not just mermaids. It's mermaids and mermen, or merfolk overall. On the left, you see the famous fairy tale of Hans Christian Andersen, a Danish author. So that really is a very, very popular fairy tale, and we as kids were read that fairy tale as well. But also in popular culture, it is quite making quite a splash, as the movie says, with Daryl Hannah. You might be a bit too young, some of you, to remember that, but it was a pretty popular, very famous movie. And then, of course, Disney picked up on it with The Little Mermaid. But even in literature, I dug out my old Harry Potters, and you can even see there is a reference to mermaids. So once you're sensitized to the term mermaid, you see them everywhere. When I'm traveling, you know, from that study in the Philippines, I went on to North America, and in Los Angeles at the airport, a massive multimeter screen in the terminal, and they were showing some mermaids diving there. In the souvenir shops, you see mermaids everywhere, keychains and books and so on. So mermaids are actually literally everywhere. You're just not aware of it because you're not sensitized towards it. Then you've got mermaid schools around the world, and you even have, as you can see at the top and bottom right, a Mercon. So similar to a Comic-Con, you have actually a Mercon where a whole bunch of mermaids then hire a pool somewhere and meet and exchange ideas and feelings and all those things you can imagine. Calendars, Brock found this one in Italy. Brock is living in Italy now, and apparently it's quite popular because it's sold out. So we even have things like that. And again, gender doesn't really play a role anymore. You have both genders there, and there are a whole bunch of really professional merfolk. So they perform at birthdays, at big conventions, at business events. They run mer schools. You wonder what you can learn in a mer school. So that you learn swimming with a tail. Actually, it's not easy. I haven't done it. Brooke has done it, and she's a good swimmer. But not being able to move your feet independently is actually quite difficult. They learn etiquette and all those things. I mean, those mer schools do an awful lot of stuff. And actually, we have one here in New Zealand, and if in Mount Maunganui. And if you look a bit closer, if you Google it, you don't have to go fast, but you have one in just around the corner from you in Toronto as well. And they're literally almost every country in the world where you Google it, you find one. So there are mer schools virtually everywhere. And then we published here in our newspaper a little bit out of it. That's always things like that that's attractive because, again, it's kooky, it's something different, something people don't expect. Another quick clip for you. Have a look.
Do people are living the lifestyle of a sea creature? No, it's not a plot of a new fantasy movie. This is for real. Take a look.
When I was in kindergarten and the teacher asked everyone to go around and say what they wanted to be when they grew up, I said mermaid. Everyone laughed at me, and now here I am. I'm a mermaid.
I can totally see myself being a mermaid. My mermaid name is Mermaid Essie. I have a lot of body insecurities. I think a lot of people do. But when I'm in my tail, I don't feel insecure anymore because suddenly it doesn't matter what size I am because I'm a mermaid. And that's what people really focus on. When I take my tail off, it almost feels like a piece of me has come off.
Discovering that there was a mermaid community and that I could actually wear a mermaid tail and outwardly express what I always felt that I was inside, it was really freeing.
Putting on a tail is probably one of the greatest feelings in the world.
It really is.
When I put it on, it's like nothing else matters.
So that's a clip that struck me. We were not looking at stuff like that, and we didn't and don't research, but I showed it to you because I think it's incredibly powerful. Those people actually go into or transform into a different person or creature and feel totally free. And you might have picked up on that thing about body image, where every magazine or so has those slim people or are fat shaming not so slim people and so on. For those mermaids here, for those ladies who were interviewed, they say, as soon as I have my mermaid tail on, it doesn't bother me anymore. I'm totally different. I'm in a different world or so. It's sort of an escapism, but it's actually great if we overcome body image issues there. I think it's a really, really good outcome from mermaiding. But again, that's not a sustainability issue. I think it's just one of those byproducts we found in our research. But what we did find, and I think that is the interesting part and where sustainability comes in, mermaids are actually very, very interesting and very active ambassadors for the environment. And you can see lots of those things here. This one in an interview, why do I love mermaids so much? My love for the water photography, conservation and education. Here, Mermaids of the Earth have their own website, a whole section on ocean conservation and mermaids. Ocean ambassadors here from Barbados. Then you have here tips for an ocean-friendly mermaid experience. So not only for the experience itself, the bottom part here, make safe, responsible seafood choices, take care of the beach and all those things. On the left, mermaids against shark fin soup. So they look at shark finning here. And then on the right-hand side, of course, mermaids, they use makeup a lot and looking at eco-friendly glitter so that you don't have those micro beads going into the ocean and into the sea and are ingested by wildlife and coral and so on and so forth. So we've seen an awful lot of very, very positive environmental things. And here again, some of the interview responses, quite a few identified with that and say they don't eat fish or seafood, they pick up garbage, they speak up when they see fish feeding, they pick up rubbish when they're walking on the beach. I'm a vegan, I hate straws and plastic, all those things. So those things came through. So mermaids actually have a very, very close relationship with the marine environment. And their message often, how they convey it is saying, don't pollute the sea because it's our environment, we live there, even though they obviously don't. But that is a message, and especially to children. They're working an awful lot with children and trying to instill those values in children. And I think it's a fantastic idea. You might argue until the cows come home whether that is cookie or nuts or if it's a normal thing or not or whatever. My argument is, as long as there's a positive outcome, who cares? They don't harm anybody, but they're doing an awful lot of good. So why not? Yeah, so that's something I think is really powerful and really, really cool. So we published out of that one as well. And again, just to show you, it is actually something that is not quite as rare as you think. That journal Shima is a international journal of research into island cultures, had a whole special issue, and ours was in there, but you can see on the right the table of contents on 19 papers in a special issue just on mermaids. Not necessarily on mermaid tourism or so, but on mermaids in general. So it's a topic that is a little bit under the radar, but still an important one, and more researched and more looked at and more popular than you actually might think. So just to wrap it up a bit, we are just about an hour, I think. So that's good. Sustainability is not a buzzword, it's a necessity. And I think we all came to the conclusion nowadays that we can't go on just talking about sustainability. We have to do something about it. We need to change our lives. We need to change our values and attitudes, and coastal and marine tourism and wildlife tourism in particular can be a powerful driver for that. And I showed you some of the issues now. And if you look back at the various points I wanted to make, I told you I'm not talking about impacts or so, like the negative impacts of seeing wildlife, getting too close to wildlife, too many boats at a time, and all those things. But if you look at the dolphin study, we look particularly of education, and the highlight there really is people do want to learn about it, and people do want to learn about more than just the biology of the dolphins. They actively ask for things, tell us about threats to the ocean environment, tell us about climate change, and so on. I talked with the guides on various tours, even the ones we didn't do our research with or so, but whenever I get a chance to go on a wildlife tour, I ask them why they don't cover those areas. And often the guides would like to, but the owners or managers say you can't, because they don't want to portray this message of doom and gloom. They want to have a fun experience and a positive experience. So it's a very tricky way to convey this message without having this doom and gloom. So that is often the reason why it's not being done. But there's a lot, at least at a lower level, where things like that are mentioned on those tours. And the second one about feeding and sustainability, there's something about the ethical issues in there. So we have to look at those things as well. We don't have evidence in most cases, whether it's bad or good. In some cases, if you look, for example, feeding bread to ducks in the park, we know it's negative. We know it's very harmful to the ducks. They get this broken wing syndrome from that. But with many species, we don't know. And you can argue in our pelagic bird watching case that some of the respondents said, well, we saw it even on the tour. There are fishing boats out, they got their fish and process them on board, throw the rest overboard, and the fish are eating it anyway. And the operators that we operated with only feed them local food, so not any imported exotic species or so. They only obtain from local fishermen, again, cut-offs and so on. So the only thing they're doing is probably getting them used to being fed by people on a boat. But again, that's happening on fishing boats anyway. So there's always this argument, is it an option? Is it not? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it neutral or so? But at least we have to have a look at that one. And then again, in terms of sustainability with the mermaids, lots of information, lots of education, awareness raising. They are true ambassadors for the coastal and marine environment. But the bottom line for sustainability, and that's probably a bit of my crusade in my academic life, is information, education, interpretation. Over and over and over again, you can't really do too much. Of course, you can do too much at one point. You don't want to be on a tour and being constantly bombarded with stuff or so. But what I mean is not enough points. Also, people who are not on tours. We have issues here, for example, in New Zealand with the private boaties. The operators are fine, but the private boaties run their boats through a pod of dolphins or so at high speed. Those, even though it's against the law, it's against the Marine Mammal Protection Act, but they either don't know or they don't care. So we need to find ways to educate those people as well. So education, interpretation, rather than just restrictions, just laws, it is not enough. Laws are important, and some of the regulations are absolutely important and necessary. But with the carrot, you probably are better than with the stick, and education and interpretation is absolutely crucial in what we are doing. With that, some thanks to Sonia and Brian for organizing and inviting me. Of course, the Ted Rogers School overall for hosting this. Then Brooke, my partner in crime, for the research we've done over many years now. The operators we were working with, both dolphin and bird operators, the Mermaid School in the Philippines in Boracay, and of course all our respondents. And with that, I hope you got a little bit out of it, and you saw some nice pictures of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I'm more than happy trying to answer questions should you have any. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was super interesting. Definitely drop your questions in the chat. I can read them out for Dr. Lück to answer. Yeah, while people are doing that, I was just wondering, the article you wrote about the mermaids, is that available anywhere for people to read online if they are interested in learning more?
It is absolutely available, and it's even an open access one, if I'm aware. There at the bottom, you have the reference and the DOI, yeah, and you can download it there, but I'm also happy to send it over to you if you like as a PDF.
Sure. I mean, I'm going to look that up right after this because that's something I'd love to see more about what you found. How did you initially find out or realize that mermaid or merfolk was a potential research topic? Like, how was that introduced to you in the first place?
That's a good one. That came from Brooke. Brooke used to live in the Philippines for a while. Her husband had a job there while she was doing her PhD with us. She was living over there most of the time. And one of the friends she made was actually the founder of the Mermaid School there in Boracay. And that was allegedly the first mermaid school in the world. And so Brooke started talking with her, and that's how it came about, really. So she had the personal connection with that person, and then we went on from there.
Okay.
There's actually a follow-up. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it sounds a little bit like a fluke, like you just kind of happen to know someone and then you find out about this whole world. Yep. Yeah. Yep,
absolutely. Another study we want to do is, Brooke is really keen on that one. You might be aware as well, like in Las Vegas, for example, and we've seen in other hotels, big hotels, they have those mermaid tanks where performers are constantly swimming around and so on as mermaids. And we want to figure out whether this can be an alternative to keeping larger fish in aquaria, for example. You know, small fish in aquaria, you can argue you can replicate a marine environment pretty accurately nowadays, but those larger species from sharks to rays and so on, they might not be adequately kept in any aquarium or marine park. So we want to see how long actually people will spend time in front of a mermaid tank as opposed to in front of, for example, a shark tank or something like that. So that's an idea that Brooke had, but that got obviously screwed through COVID now. So we're a bit on the back burner there and have other things. So, but we hope we will get to that one as well at some stage.
Okay, there's more to learn. This isn't the end. This isn't the end of your merfolk research.
No, I don't think so.
Topic. Okay, great. Yeah, if you don't feel like typing a question, you can come off mute if you want to just ask directly. Give it a couple minutes. People think think of things.
I mean, if you look at those things, and going back to what Sonia said in the beginning, we are doing fun work. If you look at those things, it is fun work. It really is a great part of our jobs. And if I, for example, look at some of the more senior professors in the world, they have big grants, and they then have research assistants also doing that field work. I don't want that. I want to do at least part of the field work by myself. Firstly, because I strongly believe you understand the data better when you are in the field and do experience also the tours or so, and do talk to people on your own. But also, again, because it's fun. I'm happy as soon as I'm on a boat and go out there. And there are days where you don't see any marine wildlife, and I'm still totally happy. That's actually an interesting finding as well in various studies, that on whale and dolphin tours, even on trips where no whales or dolphins are encountered, those are wild animals, and it does happen. People are still very happy and have a great experience. So there's this argument often that operators need to get close to dolphins or whales to provide a great experience. This is not true. I had one experience where I thought, well, a bit closer would be all right, because that was off California, off Long Beach. We had fin whales, so the second largest whales, and they were so far away that we hardly could see it. And that was actually part of a conference. So there were lots of almost professional whale watchers on there, so real nerds on there. And we were literally, you could hardly see this big animal. And then, oh, they're so close and they need to keep more distance and so on, which was absolutely ridiculous, because that really would not add anything to the experience if it's any further away. Even that was already borderline in my opinion, and secondly wouldn't have made a difference to the wildlife. So you can also overdo a little bit with that. But others, again, go very, very close. I had an experience in Iceland where the skipper had no idea what he was doing. He was twisting and turning around a minke whale there. I felt really sorry for that poor whale. I mean, no guidelines whatsoever were in place there, and he did whatever he wanted to do. And that's why we need those guidelines, and we need operators to stick to that. So there's those both extremes. But I would say, let's say, again, a bit stereotypical, but in the Western world, the vast majority of operators doing a pretty decent job. There are, of course, breaches of the guidelines, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. But overall, they're doing a pretty good job. We have more issues with private people, with private boaters, surfers, and so on, that get too close.
Oh, I see. So we have a question from Rachel Dodds. Rachel asks, what are you working on now? Presuming that you're not able to go out in the field and travel. And also, do you believe that your PM is helping with overall sustainability efforts in tourism?
Hi, Rachel. Good to talk to you. Yeah, we with the second one, the PM is trying to do a good job. We are lucky having a Labour government at the moment, and they are, even though not in a coalition with the Greens, so Labour was lucky enough to get the absolute majority and can govern on their own, but they're working very closely with the Green Party. And Labour is already much more aligned with that, in contrast to the previous national government. So things are happening, but not necessarily in the pace we want to. And COVID obviously is, I just recently read an article on that one as well. COVID is not necessarily helping. We had, after the first lockdowns, those massive reports, oh, it's great for the environment because all the cars that are of the commuters, they stay at home, and people don't go out as much or don't harass wildlife and so on. So that was a positive. But now, after more than a year, funds are drying up. So both funds that park agencies, operators that help, NGOs and so on, that they get from tourists, they dry up. They don't have that money anymore. And also funds from the government, because of the COVID crisis, we have, as you all know, massive debt amounts now to support businesses, and that is obviously then money that will not go into research, into protecting the environment and so on. So there are issues there. So we probably struggle a little bit at the moment and will probably for a while, but in our country, I'm quite positive, cautiously optimistic that the Labour government is doing a decent job as much as they can within their constraints. The first part of the question, what I'm doing now, at the moment, something very different, nothing to do with the coastal marine environment directly. Another colleague, Sabrina, who was also one of my PhD students years ago, is now back in Germany. We are doing work on well, we started just before COVID, literally in February last year, we did field work on the South Island, so just before the lockdown. On then over tourism, which is a bit of a joke now. So we don't have over tourism, but we will probably have over tourism again. But what we learned in those interviews we did there was a number of stakeholders from councils, from community groups, from individual citizens, from the Department of Conservation, from the government, and so on. So we had a whole range of stakeholders that we interviewed. So what they said what needs to be done about over tourism and where the problems are, we can very, very well now apply to what is our recovery strategy going to be. So not to repeat the same mistakes and repeat the same issues. So that was a part of a wider picture, especially over tourism. But what came through, again, unexpected, sort of unexpected, was very, very strong, was an issue about freedom camping. And freedom camping here in New Zealand is a right. You can camp anywhere on public land for one night unless you're not allowed to. So unless there are explicit signs that you can't, or you disturb people or so. But we had those small camper vans across New Zealand, and there were lots of people who literally did their toilet business on the car parks and so on. And they were on the West Coast, on the South Island. There were the jokes going around, you can smell the car park before you see it. It was really bad. So then the government enacted the Freedom Camping Act, and that basically restricts this freedom camping only to so-called self-contained vehicles, so vehicles with toilet facilities and holding tanks. That in turn, then the operators were quite smart in those small vans, because they don't have the space for a built-in toilet. They put those camping toilets in there. And often people then got certified because they have a toilet, but people didn't use them. Because if you imagine those box toilet, camping toilets, are you going outside on the car park and sit in front of everybody and using the toilet there? I mean, it's really, really ridiculous. And now a new tourism minister just said we need to get rid of that, and blah, 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 was a big outrage. And we had quite a bit of data on freedom camping, and we just published a paper on that one. Another one has just been accepted. So that's at the moment where my focus is on things like that, especially freedom camping.
Very interesting. Does that research have anything to do? I know you were recently on an RV trip for your vacation. Was that at all related?
No, totally not. I mean, actually, we just bought one ourselves, but that has nothing to do with that. We went RVing in the US and South Africa anywhere. I mean, we just love doing it ourselves. So there's certain interest in there, but that was not related to the research, really. The research came first in terms of the content. But interestingly, we published in The Conversation as well a piece on that, and we got hammered by people. How dare you that the rules have to change? It's our birthright. We've always been doing that, and so on and so forth. I got death threats over it, literally. You know, you will be wiped out, you will be watched, and all that stuff. But interestingly, the New Zealand Motor Coach Association actually contacted me and said, look, we're a bit disappointed with this and that, but they were very respectful. It was a very good email. So, and they said, what we miss really in terms of all those research projects that have been done and what the government is doing and so on, it's always looking from that supply side. Nobody asks us as freedom campers what we are thinking about it. So I'm going to meet, it was postponed due to our lockdown as well last week, but I'm going to meet with this guy on Friday, and most likely we will do some research there, looking at what their members, and there's thousands of them, so what their members think about the Freedom Camping Act and if it should be amended or not, and what should be done. So that's going to be interesting, and out of that one piece in the conversation that went all over the media, obviously, that interviews in radio and TV and so on that, that came out of it. So another project that will most likely start very soon, without even having looked for it in particular.
Yeah, okay. So we have time just for one more question, perhaps another one if it's quick, but this is from Dr. Frederick Demanche. He asks, from saltwater, I don't know if you can see this, but in the chat, he said, from saltwater to freshwater, New Zealand, despite its image as a pristine destination, has waterways that are very polluted because of agriculture. Is that affecting tourism yet? How is this managed with respect to Maori culture and rights?
Wow, that's a lot of questions in there, Frederick. Thanks for that one. Yes, New Zealand has a clean and green image, but if you have a specifically European tourist, even since I've been first here 20 years ago, European tourists were shocked what's happening here in New Zealand, how poor New Zealanders are in even basic things like recycling or so. What is in Europe, in Canada and so on was a day-to-day activity, what everybody does. It's already just part of your lifestyle. That was not happening and is still not happening very well, not done very well. In terms of the waterways, yes, we had a study recently saying there's not one single stream anymore that's not polluted, in particular because of agricultural runoffs, in particular of dairy farming. Dairy farming has been very, very lucrative here for farmers. So our sheep population, for example, has decreased from 60 million to I think about 30 or 40 million. But the dairy farming has increased an awful lot, and most of it because it's got the milk is being converted into milk powder and being exported to China. So again, back to Frederick and Rachel's questions there is, yes, the government at the moment are working on it. They want to have clean rivers again. So they're actively working, but the farmers are also actively protesting against it and so on. So there's lots of issues there. But I think they came already to an agreement, a basic agreement with farmers, and they keep working on it. So that's a really positive thing at the moment. And if we keep going, then I'm quite optimistic that it will improve massively. The marine environment, similar runoffs that come through these streams into the water. Also, and it is still shocking to many people because it's in the developed world, even in places like France or so, where you have even sewage runoffs straight into the water and into the sea. And so sometimes swimming beaches, there's science, it's not safe to swim at the moment or so, depending on the currents and weather conditions and so on. So there's an awful lot still to do, absolutely. And New Zealand is no exception there, absolutely not. It hasn't affected tourism yet, I think, because it's still not known globally too well. We are still seen as a clean and green country. We are still very, not very densely populated apart from a few big cities. So you're still out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, we were just, like Brian just said, last weekend with a motorhome, just 30 minutes here from home. And we were in an amazing regional park on the beach. You're on your own. It's just absolutely beautiful. And that's what tourists see usually. They don't see the not so nice sides of it.
Yeah, good question. I didn't realize that that reality as well. So thanks for that question, revealing that sort of side of things. Great. Well, it doesn't look like there's any other questions. So with that, I would love to thank you, Dr. Lück, for your presentation, sharing your research results and insights with us. And while I have everyone on this call, I would also just like to give a quick promo for our final Compass Speaker Series event of the semester. It'll be on April 7th with Omar McDaddy. He is the Field Unit Superintendent with Parks Canada, and we'll be discussing Rouge National Urban Park, which is in Toronto, and talking about the socioeconomic and natural capital benefits it provides. So I'm going to pop the sign up link in the chat if you did want to sign up for that right now. However, if you follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, we'll be posting about it there as well. So thank you again, Dr. Lück, and to everyone joining us today. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Or
absolute pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, and yeah, enjoy your time, enjoy the rest of your semester. We just started. We're only in week 3 now, so we still have a long stretch ahead of us. You're going towards summer, we are going towards winter now.
Yeah.
Have a good one, and again, thanks a lot.